All right, part 3. This was right after Pam Bondi gave all the binders. They got all the MAGA influencers to the White House, gave them their stupid binders and custom designed challenge coins to show the president's appreciation. Before everything went wrong, one of them would remark, "It was the best day of my life." Then the Attorney General and her team walked into the Roosevelt Room carrying boxes. Bondi had brought binders as handouts for the influencers. Her aides would later tell colleagues that the FBI had prepared them with the assurance that they contained revelatory details. Someone on her staff said, "Watch this. This is cool. This is going to be epic." But as Bondi's staff started distributing the binders, the blood pressure of other officials in the room skyrocketed. They had no idea what was in the handouts. The Attorney General was distributing something she was calling the Epstein files that had not been vetted by anyone in the White House. One official opening the binder began flipping through the pages to see if Trump's name was mentioned anywhere. A few pages in, right in the middle of the page, there it was. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, was at the White House that day. If news broke that the Epstein files had been released before the president was to meet the press with the Prime Minister, that would be all the journalists would want to talk about, and Trump would be blindsided. One of the White House aides hastily steered the influencers out of the White House, telling them that the content of the binder was embargoed until after the president's news conference with Starmer, but that the communications office would be more than happy to talk about the files afterwards. As the influencers left, they snapped selfies in front of the White House holding their binders, quickly posting the pictures on social media. They had now created a new shockwave of anticipation for what might be in them. Like some others in the White House, Bondi had either grossly underestimated or simply been blind to the voracious appetite of the MAGA base information about Epstein. Her binders contained information about him and his activities, flight logs, contact lists, summaries of items taken from his residences after his 2019 arrest, and other material, but nearly all of it had been previously released. Bondi had somehow simultaneously oversold and trivialized the Epstein files, and now the influencers were made to feel like dupes. They are dupes. In the Roosevelt Room, Bondi had told the influencers that this was just the first tranche of the files. There would be more coming, she assured them, but that story would change too. I think this was when they had 1,000 FBI officers pulled in, locked in a fucking office to review these files. Some of them wept when they read them. Justice Department officials were reviewing the Epstein material, but months would pass before the department or any of Trump's closest advisors knew how many documents there were. More than 3 million pages of files related to Epstein, and potentially as many as 6 million. In the early months, officials were focused on going through a trove of what were known as the 302 forms, records of FBI agents' interview notes with witnesses, some of whom were victims of Epstein. These were raw records, often containing unverified information. Trump was mentioned numerous times, as were other prominent men. In June, 4 months after the circus in the Roosevelt Room with the influencers, Bondi and Blanche briefed the president on the status of the Epstein review. "We've gone through the files," Blanche told Trump. "There's not a lot in there. A lot of child porn. Obviously, we can't put any of that out. There's some mentions of you, but nothing substantive. Most of Trump's advisors has rejected out of hand the idea of releasing the FBI's raw interview notes. More important, they wanted to avoid putting out anything that could damage the president." With full transparency a non-starter, a small group of White House and Justice Department officials decided to draft a memo that would explain why the department was not releasing any further information about Epstein. But even the process of composing the memo was fraught, in part because no one wanted their name on it, and in part because of the deep concerns within the leadership of the FBI. Remember the memo that wasn't signed, and we were all like, God, nobody wanted to even put their fucking name on this. For weeks, Patel and Bongino, the deputy FBI director, had grown more infuriated as they realized the scale of the mess for which they were now being blamed. They repeatedly raised alarms internally that the Epstein crisis was gathering momentum with Trump supporters. Bongino wanted to convey something definitive to the MAGA base, and he and Patel pushed for the immediate release of the surveillance footage from the federal facility where Epstein was found unalived in a cell. Bongino hated the DOJ's nothing to see here memo being drawn up for public release. He told Patel this would in no way align with their promises of transparency after taking over the FBI, and he objected to putting the FBI seal on the letterhead. But he was overruled. Patel privately shared many of Bongino's concerns, but in an internal email on July 2nd, the FBI director gave his support for the memo. "Thanks for the edits. I still believe this is the correct vehicle forward," Patel wrote, with the occasional typo, of course, to a small group of colleagues, including Blanche. "I'm happy to add any additional sentences to complete the shortfall, but I do think we address specifically why more can't be released as it relates to specific topics, i.e. court orders, CSAM, child, victim protections, etc. We already know that was bullshit. Unredacted tons of victims' names, but redacted all of the people who were sending. We know what happened. Bondi rarely used her Justice Department email, and she was not on the chain where the group worked on the memo. She was aware of both the memo and the release of the prison video, was not involved in editing the document. Inside the White House, Trump had no interest in releasing anything. And senior officials, including Wiles and Blair, were initially unconvinced about the reach of the Epstein crisis. They told colleagues the Republican voters just didn't care, and they had early data from Trump's chief pollster, Tony Fabrizio, to demonstrate it. The Epstein brouhaha, in their view, was driven by fringe conspiracy theorists and amplified by noisy online influencers who didn't represent a meaningful block of voters. If the White House engaged it, it would only pump it up, putting an official stamp on the matter. Wiles, Blair, and others around Trump had seen him weather every storm imaginable for years, and in their view, this wasn't a storm, it was passing clouds at most. Bongino told anyone who would listen that this was a grave miscalculation. It's not an online story, he told White House advisors. You don't understand. On July 7th, the Department of Justice and the FBI released the memo. It was brief, an unsigned 1.5-page statement explaining that after an exhaustive search of its databases, hard drives and network drives, as well as physical searches of squad areas, locked cabinets, desks, closets, and other areas where responsive material may have been stored, and a corresponding review of more than 300 gigabytes of evidence, the department concluded that there was no evidence Epstein had maintained a client list. He actually emailed himself the list over and over. I've put it out there. It's out there. A list of people I think he was blackmailing. The memo also reaffirmed the official finding that Epstein's death in 2019 had been a self-unaliving. The memo was accompanied by the release of video footage from the federal jail in Manhattan where Epstein passed, footage that officials said supported the conclusion of self-unaliving. And with that, the memo indicated the Trump admin would not be releasing further information regarding Epstein case, and no further investigation of uncharged third parties was warranted. Less than 5 months after Bondi had referred to a secret client list of high-profile predators, the case was closed. Or so it seemed. If the administration expected that the memo would be the last word on the Epstein case and that the president's most ardent supporters would accept the purported conclusions of the DOJ simply because the department and its investigative agencies were now controlled by Donald Trump, they were sorely mistaken. The memo was an earthquake, and it was received by a part of the MAGA base as an outright betrayal. It amounted to abrupt disavowal of the sinister conspiracy theories that some of Trump's closest confidants had hyped during the Biden presidency and that they promised to expose once Trump was returned to power. Then they talk about the release of the surveillance video, which Bongino and Patel had intended as a gesture of transparency, further fueled the fire. Remember, it backfired. There was a minute missing. There was more missing than that. Bondi initially attributed this to a nightly system reset, which was bullshit. And I have emails about a tech guy who worked at that jail who was warning them that if you take this out, it will wipe the system. And that's what they wanted.